Griselbrand, an 8-mana 7/7 legendary demon creature with flying and lifelink. If you pay 7 life, you draw 7 cards.
Money, please!
With these 2 lines of text, Griselbrand left a lasting mark on Magic the Gathering. How has a creature card with such a high cost become so recognizable today rather than lost in a sea of forgettable cards? With its debut in Avacyn Restored on May 4th, 2012, we take a look back and ask, how good was Griselbrand really? On the surface, a creature who costs 8 mana with 4 of them requiring black mana, typically that isn't the recipe for a super memorable playable card. Still, Griselbrand's effect made it a potent bomb in a number of formats as it quickly utilized the player's life as a resource, with an insane trade-off of 7 life for 7 cards in hand. Many players will tell you that card draw and advantage is the key to any successful deck, and despite the cost, Griselbrand was one of the greatest engines for card draw applied to a creature. With that addition of flying and lifelink, Griselbrand's quote-unquote downside for that card draw was made moot with one swing of the creature itself, gaining you back that 7 life you spent in lifesteal. Still, for competitive play, 8 mana is asking a lot. Thankfully for Standard at the time, there were tools that worked perfectly well with Griselbrand. For the Avacyn Restored Standard format, the decks that found the most success utilizing Griselbrand were Reanimator Decks. In short, these are decks designed to sift through the library and dump key win condition cards into the graveyard, while also seeking spells to play those cards from the graveyard directly. At the time, tools like Grizzly Salvage and Mulch were used to get cards into the graveyard, while cards like Unburial Rites and Seance were used to play creatures from the graveyard. While still requiring 5 and 4 mana respectively, they were much easier and cheaper ways to cheat Griselbrand into play and get yourself 7 new cards in hand. For Reanimator decks in this standard format, Griselbrand wasn't necessarily a win condition on its own. Many of the top decks only ran 1 or 2 copies of Griselbrand simply as an engine to fish for true win conditions, most commonly being Angel of Serenity and Thragtusk, which often saw playsets in these decks. Still, Griselbrand was an essential component to these standard format Reanimator decks, providing players with insane card advantage and the means to win games. This is how the Reanimator decks were run, but how did it fare in competitive play? In one of its first showings in October of 2012, Griselbrand aided Reanimator decks to a second place showing at Star City Games Open in Cincinnati, with a deck piloted by Chris Weidinger. At that same event, another version of this deck placed 11th, this time played by Brad Davis. Griselbrand made an even bigger statement at the Auckland Grand Prix in November 2012, where 2 Reanimator decks placed well at the event. Anthony Purdom landed the 5th spot in the tournament with his deck, and Walker McMurdo took the top spot in the Grand Prix with a deck that utilized red mana for removal spells like Dreadbore, and another discard engine in Faithless Looting. In that same month, Griselbrand also placed 6th in a deck played by James Lance at Star City Games Dallas. This version of the Reanimator deck featuring Griselbrand would round out its showings in the Avacyn Restored Standard format by placing 8th and 3rd at Star City Games Kansas City, piloted by Jacob Bow and Michael James respectively. And in that same month, March of 2013, would snag first place again at the TCG Player Chicago Diamond 5K with a Reanimator deck played by Spencer Freeman. On September 26, 2013, Avacyn Restored along with Griselbrand would rotate out of Standard, but the Demon card draw engine would leave its mark with notable top 8 placings at a professional level. Then its efficacy turned to the Modern format. Griselbrand's record as a Modern powerhouse continued to build upon the card's established legacy. As a potent card draw engine, Modern players quickly went to work breaking him into the format, which has only evolved as new cards have rotated in. Reanimator decks were still very much a thing. In fact, they got even better with access to the instant spell, Goryo's Vengeance. This spell paired perfectly with Griselbrand. Being only 2 mana, it reanimated it from the graveyard, allowed you to draw what cards you needed, and then even allowing you to swing in for a little bit of life gain back. It was a powerful tool. Now in Modern, Griselbrand was fishing for even stronger win conditions, such as Emrakul, the Eon's Torn, which many of these decks ran playsets of. New decks for Modern also sprung up around Griselbrand, a version of the Neoform deck along with the aptly named Griselbrand deck, and Allosaurus combo deck. The goal of these styles of decks were in keeping with Griselbrand's theme, cheating in huge creatures with powerful effects early, either from the graveyard, the hand, or sacrificing a creature such as Allosaur Rider with Neoform or Eldritch Evolution. Griselbrand with its insane card draw typically being the first target in this combo. So with all these new tools at players' disposals to use in conjunction with Griselbrand, how has the card fared in the modern format? In one of its first showings after rotating from Standard, an instant Reanimator deck featuring Griselbrand placed third with a deck played by Michael Pinton at PTQ Cons of Tekir in June of 2014. The deck continued to find success in the following year with one of the first events of 2015 placing third again at Star City Games Premier IQ in a deck played by Garrett Young. Top 3 seemed to be Instant Reanimator's typical showing, as the deck featuring Griselbrand again hit this spot at GP Toronto as well as Star City Games Columbus and Indianapolis. It finally broke into second place at Star City Games Orlando as well as the Magic World Cup. The Allosaur's combo deck, which utilized Griselbrand along with Neoform and other versions of the Griselbrand deck, also showed quite well in competitive play in the modern format, these decks becoming more prominent as essential tools such as Eldritch Evolution and Neoform eventually rotated into modern. During the MTGO Modern MCQ event in May of 2019 alone, Griselbrand placed 9th, 8th, and 2nd. In October of 2019, it also sneaked into 11th at MTGO Modern PTQ. Entering the 2020 competitive year, these decks would find even more success at events like MTGO Modern Showcase with 2 top 8 places, as well as making the top 8 at MTGO Modern Super Qualifier in June of 2020. Finding success outside of the standard format wasn't just limited to Modern for Griselbrand, as competitive players turned to exploit the insane card advantage it offered in Legacy. In keeping with Griselbrand's brand, the Big Demon was an essential component to reanimation decks in the Legacy format. He played a similar role to both its standard and modern iterations, being a cheap way to get a card advantage over your opponent and combo off the draws for a nearly instant win. In a format as prolific as Legacy, players wasted no time in breaking Griselbrand into insane reanimation decks. These decks offered a new tool to help get Griselbrand out early with Animate Dead, Reanimate, and Exhume. Certainly some of the cheapest and most powerful cards with these effects, and essentially the namesake for this entire deck design. While Entomb was the cheapest and easiest way to fish Griselbrand from the library and into the graveyard. It made for a powerful combination that led Reanimator decks to great prominence in the Legacy format. Over the course of a year, spanning 2013 and 2014, during the Star City Games Series event, Reanimator decks featuring Griselbrand consistently broke top 8 showings, including a 3rd place showing in Atlanta, 4th in Columbus, 3rd in Kansas City, 5th in Seattle, 2nd in Philadelphia, 3rd in Minneapolis, 2nd and 3rd in Cleveland, 3rd in Milwaukee, and finally hitting number 1 in Columbus with a deck by Thomas Graves. Over the years, as Reanimator decks with Griselbrand became more commonplace, the community of competitive Legacy players began to force-feed answers for this powerful combo. These cards, either in the sideboard or having entire decks built around them, began to really dig into this strategy's efficacy, and a steep decline in its performance was inevitable. Key graveyard hates such as Rest in Peace were heavily utilized to counter the rise of Griselbrand, and was effective in reducing the number of decks using this tactic. The fading of Legacy Reanimator decks featuring Griselbrand was covered beautifully in an article written by Drew Levin for Star City Games. He goes over the hate the deck faced, as well as some possible ways to build around it. It provides a lot of great information on Griselbrand in Legacy specifically, and I really suggest you guys give it a read. You can find a link to it in the description below. Despite the rise of graveyard hate, there have been some recent examples of Griselbrand's power in Legacy, as the card was used during the Four Seasons Italy event in June 2021 and reached 2nd and 1st place by players Lorenzo Locante and Stefano Sergai, respectively, showing that while answers have been found, they can't stop the unbelievable force that is Griselbrand. That force wasn't just exerting its pressure on these more competitive formats. Being a legendary creature, of course, Griselbrand would continue to torment players around the kitchen table in Commander. And it was in this format that Griselbrand was truly broken. Being a legendary creature with a powerful effect, Griselbrand was of course a natural fit in many players' Commander decks. The instant card draw effect coupled with the format's higher life pool made this card irresistible. Soon, Grisel was blessing every kitchen table commander game everywhere, and something dawned on the player base. The card was just too strong, even broken. When Griselbrand hits the field, a player could just cycle through whatever life they may have left, and as they say, life is a resource, and you could use all of that extended resource in Commander to fish for your win conditions and combos. Simply put, Griselbrand allowed players in Commander to just win the game unless an opponent had an immediate answer for the creature. With the card effect essentially reading, "You win the game," it was only a matter of time until the Banhammer had Griselbrand square in its sights. In June 2012, just a month after Griselbrand's arrival, the legendary demon was officially banned from Commander. Now, that's not saying too much, as many casual playgroups pick and choose their own rules, but it goes to show just how busted drawing 7 cards can be when your life total is inflated. Being banned from a format like Commander is a testament to how a card can pop off, and Griselbrand now shares that honor, proving that, at least to some, Griselbrand is an extremely good card, and has been throughout its history. Perhaps even too good.